What happens when the man who raised you for 21 years has to hear you ask, "If they ask who my father is, what am I supposed to say?" Welcome back. I'm Ray. Tonight's story is for anyone who has ever loved a child deeply enough to understand that love and blood are not always the same thing. It's about fatherhood, silence, old wounds, and the kind of truth that can shake a family to its core. Before we begin, please subscribe to the channel and turn on the bell so you won't miss stories like this, stories that help us reflect, heal, and make sense of the relationships that shape our lives.
My name is Daniel. I'm not the man who created that girl, but for the past 21 years, I'm the one who's been there. I'm the one who put together her first crib with the clumsy hands of a man who never thought he'd be anybody's father. I'm the one who carried her back and forth through a cramped apartment in Grand Rapids, Michigan, when she had a fever in the middle of the night. I'm the one who taught her how to tie her shoes, how to keep her balance on a blue bicycle, and later, how to look people in the eye when she shook their hand. Her name is Amadi. The first time I heard that name, I knew she wasn't like the other kids in the neighborhood. That name had its own sound, its own history, a story that, in some way, didn't belong to me. But I never saw that as a problem. To me, a child doesn't have to look like you for you to love them. They just have to reach out that tiny little hand, and if your heart's soft enough, that's all it takes. When I married her mother, Amadi was still little. Little enough to run over and hug my leg, little enough to call me Dad before I even knew whether I was ready to hear that word. I still remember the first time she called me that. It wasn't some big dramatic moment. No music swelling, no tears, no miracle. Just an ordinary morning. She spilled cereal all over the kitchen floor, looked up at me in a panic, and mumbled, "Dad, I'm sorry." I just froze. One little word like that, and it went straight through me. From that day on, I stopped thinking of myself as helping raise somebody else's kid. I thought of myself as her father, and I lived that way for more than 20 years. Amadi grew up into a smart, stubborn young woman with the same quiet streak her mother has. She's in community college, trying to save every dollar she can, going to school and working part-time. The kind of kid people look at and say, "She's got a good head on her shoulders." And I was always proud of that. I was proud in the way older men usually are, not saying much, just quietly paying attention. Filling up her gas tank before the weather turned cold, leaving cash for brake repairs in the kitchen drawer, asking, "Everything okay?" in a casual tone, like I hadn't been lying awake half the night because I heard my daughter sigh on the other side of the wall. I thought I understood this family. I thought I knew where I stood in it. I was wrong. It started with little changes. A daughter who didn't leave her phone face down on the dinner table anymore, a distracted look in her eyes, coming home from class and sitting in the car for 10 extra minutes in the driveway, like she was trying to gather the courage to come inside. If you live long enough, you learn something. Family tragedy almost never comes crashing through the front door with a bang. It slips in like a draft under the door, cold, thin, but enough to make your skin crawl. I started noticing Amadi smiling to herself while she texted, then crying in the bathroom. When her mother asked, she said, "It's nothing." When I asked, she said, "I'm just tired." And damn it, every parent knows "I'm fine" is usually the first lie kids tell when they're drowning. That night, my wife was standing at the sink washing dishes so hard the plate in her hand kept clinking against the faucet. I asked her what was going on, and she just said, "I think she's hiding something." I still remember how I gave a little dry laugh. I said, "What kid that age doesn't have secrets?" Looking back now, I think that was the last moment I was still naive inside my own house. The truth came out on a Sunday night. The air in the kitchen felt thick, like a storm was rolling in. Amadi's mother kept pressing her. Her voice got sharper and sharper. At first, Amadi dodged the questions. Then all of a sudden, she snapped back. "I talked to him." The whole kitchen went dead silent. I still remember the sound of the refrigerator humming, the ticking of the wall clock, her younger brother dragging his chair a little across the floor, then stopping. Him didn't need a name. We all knew who she meant. The man who hadn't been here for 21 years. The man my wife had almost never talked about. The man I had, honestly, learned to think of as some old shadow that no longer had enough strength to cross the threshold of this house. I was wrong again. Amadi's mother turned and looked at her like she'd just been slapped. "You did what?" Her voice wasn't angry anymore. It was panic. "I just talked to him," Amadi said. "I have a right to know who he is." "No, you don't understand that man." "Then tell me who he is." "No." That no came out too fast, too loud, too instinctive. And in that moment, I saw something that chilled me to the bone. My wife wasn't just angry, she was scared. But before I could really sit with that, Amadi said the next thing. "He's sending money to help me with school. $400 a month." I don't even know how to describe what that felt like. It wasn't anger right away. It wasn't pain right away. It was emptiness. Like somebody had drilled a hole straight through the middle of my chest, and everything I believed about this family was leaking out of me. $400 a month. A man who hadn't been around for 21 years was suddenly stepping into her life with money. I'd changed her tires in the snow. I'd worked extra weekends to pay her first semester tuition. I'd put back shoes I wanted because she needed a laptop for class. And now, with a few bank transfers, some stranger had wedged his way into a story I had poured my whole life into. I wish I could tell you I handled that moment with grace, that I was generous, calm, kind. Truth is, I just sat there. Because if I opened my mouth, I was afraid I'd say something I'd be ashamed of. That night, after the kids went upstairs, my wife lost it. She paced the living room like a trapped animal, said Amadi was being bought, said that man had never wanted to be a father, said he was the kind of man who only shows up when the hard part's over, when there are no more diapers to change, no more medicine to pay for, no more tears to wipe away. I listened. Then I asked a question I should have asked 20 years ago. What exactly happened between you and him? She stopped cold. I had never seen my wife go that silent. It was the kind of silence that felt hard as ice. It doesn't matter. I looked at her, stunned. It doesn't matter? Daniel here has raised that girl for over 20 years. Now some man comes out of nowhere, sends her money, starts talking about another family, property in Texas, bloodlines, roots, and you're telling me it doesn't matter? She turned away. I protected her. Or were you protecting yourself? She looked at me like I had betrayed her. And maybe from where she was standing, I had. But that night, for the first time in our marriage, I felt like I wasn't living with my wife. I was living with a locked room. A room she had been sitting inside for 21 years, and I had never once been invited in. In the days that followed, I got cold with Amadi. Not because I hated her, because I loved her too much. That's the ugly contradiction in a lot of fathers. When we hurt the most, we don't pull our kids closer, we pull away. She probably thought I was mad because she talked to her biological father. No, I was mad because I realized there was a part of her I had never reached, a part that had been asleep for 21 years, and all it took was one message from another man to wake it up. I started noticing things I had ignored before. Amadi's curls didn't look like her mother's. Her skin had always told a story nobody in this house was really equipped to fully explain. The way she stood in front of the mirror longer than usual. Questions she used to ask as a teenager like, "Dad, who do you think I look like?" Back then, I'd put my arm around her and said, "You look like you." I thought that was enough. Now I understand that sometimes a beautiful answer can still be an incomplete one. And realizing that made me feel like I had failed her. A week later, Amadi came to find me in the garage. I was pretending to fix a lawnmower that wasn't broken, just so I'd have something to look at besides her face. She stood in the doorway for a long time before she finally said, "Dad?" That one word alone was enough to make my chest tighten. I didn't turn around right away. I was scared to look at her. Scared I'd see guilt in her eyes, or worse, distance. I didn't mean to hurt you. I tightened my grip on the wrench in my hand. But you did. She went quiet. Then she said softly, I know. That's the hardest part about grown kids. When they're little, they hurt you without knowing it. But when they're older, sometimes they know exactly what they're doing, and they still have to do it, because their truth matters more than your comfort. I turned and looked at her. She looked exhausted, eyes puffy, shoulders slumped. Not the face of a daughter betraying her father, the face of a young woman being stretched between two loyalties. What did he say to you? Amadi told me. She said he was German mixed, that his father was a black man, that he worked in finance, had a wife, had 2 children, that he knew he had missed everything and couldn't fix it, but he wanted to help her finish school, that there was also something about her grandfather's property in Texas, and legally, Amadi might have some kind of claim connected to it. I listened to every word and felt something ugly rise up inside me. Jealousy. Not jealousy over money, jealousy over the past. Jealousy over the fact that no matter how many years I had stood by that girl, that man could still give her something I never could, a key to the part of her that came before me. You can't beat blood at that game. You can be the better father, kinder, more present, more real. But you can't answer the question, where do I come from? And once a child starts asking that question, an adoptive father, or any father who stepped in, has to face his quietest nightmare. If my child needs to know who she is, will my love still be enough to keep her here? That night, after everybody had gone to bed, I sat alone at the kitchen table. The same table I built by hand the summer Amadi turned 13. There were scratches on the left corner from when she spilled nail polish, a little dent from when her younger brother threw his keys. Marks of a family. My family. I sat there staring up at the dark staircase, and for the first time in my life, I asked myself a question that hit like a knife. Is she still my daughter? I didn't mean legally. I meant in the deeper, scarier sense. When a child turns toward her roots, does she accidentally turn away from the man who raised her? When she hears another man's story, does she start rewriting her memories of me? Will there come a day when somebody asks her about her father and she hesitates? Will the word dad, the word I had guarded like the most precious gift of my life, turn into something temporary? I sat with that question for a long time, long enough to understand something youth rarely admits, and age eventually has no choice but to learn. Love is not ownership. If you only love a child as long as they reflect the role you want to play in their life, that's not love. That's a need for validation. And if you really are their father, then sometimes you have to accept stepping back so they can walk toward what they need to know, even when it hurts you. But that night wasn't the last night I hurt. The next morning, I walked past our bedroom and saw the door cracked open. My wife must have gone downstairs or outside to take out the trash, because the room was empty, just that thin light coming through the curtains. I wasn't looking for anything. I was just walking by. But my eyes landed on her vanity. On top of it was everything familiar from the woman I had lived with for more than 20 years. A perfume bottle nearly empty, powder compact, a few lipsticks, a hairbrush with a couple strands still caught in it, face cream, a pair of earrings tossed off to one side like she had taken them off in a hurry the night before. And in the corner of the vanity, wedged between an old powder case and a makeup brush bag, was a folded piece of paper. I knew right away it didn't belong with the rest. Some things sit out of place in a way that tells you they've just been pulled out of the past. I stepped closer. It was an old letter, the paper softened with age. The fold lines were creased deep, like it had been opened and refolded over and over again. Nobody had to tell me. My wife must have taken it out and read it again after everything that happened. And in the middle of all that turmoil, she had accidentally left it on the table. I stood there for a long time. My hand didn't reach for it right away, because I knew once I opened that letter, there would be no going back to my old innocence. But then I picked it up anyway. and I read it. The letter was dated the year Amadi turned 3. The man wrote that he knew he had no right to ask forgiveness, that he had let everything slip out of his hands in the most cowardly way possible, that his family had interfered, that he knew he had failed to protect Amadi's mother and child. But he wanted to send money regularly, wanted, at the very least, for his name not to disappear completely from the little girl's life. Wanted that one day, when she was old enough, she would know that he had come back. Late, but he had come back. I read that line over and over again. Late, but he had come back. My hands went cold, not because I felt sorry for him right then, but because I realized something. This story had never been as simple as my wife's silence had made it seem. That man wasn't completely innocent, but he also hadn't disappeared as completely as I'd believed. And the thing that hurt me most wasn't that he had come back now. It was that he had come back a long time ago, and nobody ever said a word. I put the letter back exactly where I found it, tucked between the makeup like it had never been touched. But from that moment on, something inside me had changed. My pain wasn't just hurt anymore. It was the feeling of being shut out of a very real part of my own family story. The next morning, my wife started in again. She said Amadi was not to contact him anymore, said she was too young, too naive, said that man was calculating, said if Amadi kept this up, she wouldn't stand for it. I'd heard enough. I told her to sit down. She didn't. I kept talking anyway. You can't force her to keep living in the dark. Whose side are you on? She snapped. I looked her straight in the eye. I'm on my daughter's side. She let out a bitter laugh. Your daughter? Listen to yourself. She's not. Don't. I cut her off. My voice wasn't loud, but it was enough to make the whole kitchen go still. Don't finish that sentence. She stared at me, breathing hard. So was I. There are moments in a marriage when you understand that if you take one more step, nothing will ever go back to the way it was. But sometimes the truth still has to be said. You think I'm not hurting? I asked. You think I don't feel humiliated that a man who vanished for over 20 years gets to come back with money? You think I don't feel pushed aside? Her eyes reddened, but I didn't stop. I spent all last night wondering who I even am in this house. Your husband? The guy who pays the bills? Or just the stand-in man until the real one showed back up? Daniel? No, this time I'm talking. I had never spoken to her like that. Maybe because for the first time, I wasn't trying to play peacemaker anymore. I love that girl. I love her enough to accept that she has the right to know who she is. If she wants to talk to her biological father, she's going to talk to him. If she wants to hear that story, she's going to hear it. And if you really believe everything you did these past years was for her, then you should have enough courage to believe that the truth cannot steal her from us. What if it does? She cried. That was the truest thing she had said so far. Not anger, not hatred. Fear of losing her daughter. I looked at the woman I had lived with for more than 2 decades, and for the first time, I no longer saw her as the keeper of secrets. I saw her for what she really was. A mother growing older inside her fear. My voice softened. Loving your child doesn't mean holding on so tight forever. It means letting them choose and trusting that what we gave her all these years is real enough that she won't forget. She sat down in the chair. Her whole body seemed to collapse. And then, for the first time, she told the truth. Not with defensiveness, but with the exhaustion of someone who had been holding a door shut for far too long. She said that back then, Amadi's biological father hadn't just walked away. What happened between them wasn't some simple breakup, and that was that. His family in Texas had money, a name, the kind of life people like us only ever see from the other side of glass. When she got pregnant, he promised he would step up. Promised he would tell his family. Promised he would choose her and the baby. But in the end, the first one who came back wasn't him. It was his family's lawyer. I still remember how her voice sounded when she said that. Like something inside it had torn. Do you understand, Daniel? He didn't just leave. He let other people come tell me it would be best if I disappeared. That the child would ruin his future. That if I knew what was good for me, I'd stay away from Texas and stay out of the life his family had already planned for him. I stood there speechless. She laughed then, a laugh that sounded like cracked glass. And then afterward he wrote letters, sent money, sent apologies. But you tell me, how was I supposed to trust that? How was I supposed to trust that a man who let his family speak to the mother of his child like that was fit to be anybody's father a few months later? I didn't answer, because for the first time I saw the whole picture. That man wasn't entirely a monster, but he had been a coward, weak, the kind of man who let other people decide for him at the exact moment he should have stood up. And for a young pregnant woman who was broke, terrified, and being threatened by money and power, that was enough to turn any promise into ashes.
"I don't hate him just because he left," my wife said. "I hate him because he didn't protect that little girl before she was even born." That was the first thing she had said that I believed completely. And at the same time, it made this tragedy hurt on a whole different level. Because now I understood. She hadn't kept the secret just out of selfishness. She kept it out of fear. Fear of that man. Fear of that man's family. Fear of the world they represented. Fear that one day her daughter would walk into that house and be looked at like something shameful. And like a lot of mothers, she chose a kind of protection that was flawed, but understandable. She hid the truth completely. That night, I knocked on Amadi's bedroom door. She opened it with her eyes full of caution, like she was bracing herself for a sentence to be handed down. I hated that I had made her look at me that way. I stepped inside and sat down on the edge of her bed. The room smelled like shampoo, books, and that distinct scent of youth trying hard to become adulthood. I said, "I'm not going to stop you from talking to him." Her eyes filled instantly. "Dad?" I raised my hand for her to let me finish. "I don't like this. I'm not going to pretend I'm taking the high road. It hurts me. It hurts a lot. But my pain cannot become your prison." She started crying. I almost did too. "I don't want to lose you." And right then, all the things I had been torturing myself with for days suddenly felt smaller. I looked at her, the child I used to carry on my shoulders to watch fireworks, the girl I fought with over curfew, the one I sat outside the emergency room for when she wrecked her bike at 12 years old. And I understood something simple. There is no man on earth who can take those 21 years away from me. Not one text message. Not $400 a month. Not some will in Texas. Not blood. Not history. I put my hand on her knee. "Listen to me. A man can give you his name, your roots, answers about where you started. But the one who stayed beside you through the longest years of your life, he doesn't disappear just because the truth showed up late." She bent down and wrapped her arms around me the way she used to when she was little. And in that moment, I stopped asking myself whether she was still my daughter. Because some questions only exist when you're standing too far away from love. Step close enough, and you already know the answer. I thought that would be enough. But the past always finds a way to collect its final debt. A few days later, Amadi came into the kitchen holding a white envelope in her hand. She didn't sit down, just stood by the counter, like standing might make it easier to take. "He sent this to me." I opened the letter with her permission. Inside were copies of part of a legal file, a short letter from her biological father, and a note from a law firm in Texas. I read every line slowly. Amadi's paternal grandfather had died almost a year earlier. In the inheritance paperwork, there was a clause leaving part of the estate to any direct heir not formally acknowledged at the time the estate was originally filed, but later verified. Legal language is always cold, but sometimes, behind that cold language is an entire life trembling with regret. There was one last sheet clipped behind it, a copy of a handwritten letter, formally entered into the file. Just a few lines, but enough to make the whole kitchen feel like it stopped breathing. Amadi's grandfather wrote that he had hurt his son with standards as hard as steel and an obsession with reputation. That if somewhere out there was a grandchild carrying the family bloodline, and that child had been shut out of the family name because of the failures of adults, then he did not want that child erased from history one more time. I put the letter down. Amadi looked at me. Her eyes were red, but she wasn't crying. "Mom's gonna think I only care about the money." I shook my head. "This isn't just money." She swallowed hard. "Then what is it?" I looked at her, then at the documents on the table. "It's a name, recognition, proof that you were kept outside this door before you were even old enough to knock on it yourself." She sat down and folded her hands together. "I don't know if I should go to Texas." I understood how heavy that question was. Going to Texas wasn't just going to meet her biological father. It was walking into a house that once didn't want her to exist. It was stepping into the history of people who had, at one point, wanted to erase her. It was facing the possibility of being hurt all over again. And it was also facing another fear. If that door opened, would she walk all the way through it and out of the part of life that belonged to us? Let me tell you the truth. In that moment, I wanted to say, "Don't go." I wanted to tell her, "Leave it alone, kid. We don't need them." I wanted to be selfish one more time. But then I looked into Amadi's eyes and saw something I couldn't ignore. It wasn't greed, it was emptiness. The emptiness of a child who had grown up with half a story. The emptiness of a young woman trying to understand where she belonged without betraying the people who raised her. I took a long breath and said the words that sounded, even to me, like something inside my chest was breaking. If it belongs to you, then you go claim it. Not because of the money, because you do not deserve to live your whole life like somebody whose name got erased. Amadi burst into tears, not the loud crying of a child, the quiet kind that comes when somebody finally gives you permission to exist fully. That night, my wife found out. This time her anger wasn't loud like before. It was colder, more dangerous. She held the stack of papers in her hand, shaking more with every page she looked at. "No," she said, "absolutely not. She is not going to that house. I will not let them get their hands on her again." "Again?" I asked. She gripped the file tighter. "You don't understand." "Then help me understand." She turned toward Amadi, then away, then all of a sudden sank into a chair like her knees had quit on her. "I'm not scared of her taking their money," she said quietly. "I'm scared of her standing in that house, looking at the pictures on the walls, looking at people with the same eyes she has, and realizing a whole family knew she might exist and still chose not to call her by name." Amadi started crying before I did. I just stood there frozen, because that was the deepest fear of all, the truest one, the cruelest one. Not poverty, not lawsuits, not scandal. The feeling of being rejected by your own roots. "I know," I said to my wife, "but the pain isn't that she learns the truth. The pain is that the truth was hidden from her so long, she might have started believing she wasn't worthy of knowing it." She looked up at me. There was no longer the anger of a mother trying to control the situation in her eyes. Just the exhaustion of someone who had guarded a door for so long, she forgot the child behind it would eventually grow up and want to open it herself. Amadi looked at me, her voice breaking. "If I go, will Mom think I'm betraying her?" My wife broke down crying. She shook her head, then nodded, then shook it again. That's the truest thing about a lot of mothers. They can love their child so much, they react in contradictions inside the same breath. Finally, she said, "I don't want you to go. But I don't want you to live your whole life and one day come back asking why I never gave you the right to know." The kitchen stayed silent for a long time. And then I realized something. Some families don't heal with one beautiful apology. They just sit together in the truth long enough that nobody has to hide anymore. I don't know what's going to happen next. I don't know how sincere that man really is. I don't know whether the Texas inheritance is an opportunity or a mess.
I don't know how long it'll take my wife to accept that Amadi is grown now, and old secrets can't lock her up anymore. And to be honest, I don't know whether on my worst days I'll still feel replaced again. Maybe I will. That's the thing about being human. Healing doesn't move in a straight line. But I do know this. I did not raise Amadi for 21 years just so that when she stood at the biggest crossroads of her life, I could turn my love into chains. If she needs to walk toward the past to understand herself better, I won't stop her. If she needs to ask questions I can't answer, I'll let her ask them. If she needs to meet the man who gave her life, I will step back. Not because I'm weak, because I'm her father. And at my age, I understand this now. Being a father does not always mean being the one who gets held onto. Sometimes being a father means loving enough to let go, without ever letting go in your heart. A few days later, when Amadi was getting ready for the trip to Texas, she stood in the doorway of the garage watching me fold up an old suitcase for her. The same garage where she had once come looking for me, red-eyed, calling me Dad in a way that felt like it yanked my whole heart toward her. She stood there a long time before she finally asked, "If they ask who my father is, what am I supposed to say?" My hand froze. Some questions don't come loud, but they go straight into the deepest part of a man. I looked up at her, at the curls I never could manage properly when she was little, at the face carrying lines from a past I didn't create, at the eyes that, for 21 years, had always searched for me whenever she was scared, in pain, or didn't know who to trust. Then I said, "You tell the truth." She waited. I went on. "That you have one man who gave you life, and one man who stayed long enough to teach you how to live it." Amadi cried. This time, I didn't just stand there. I stepped forward and pulled her into my arms. And when she held me back, tight, I understood something I wish I had known sooner, because maybe it would have spared me from tearing myself apart all those days. Blood may explain where a child begins, but love is what decides how they were raised. And if life is cruel enough to make a child go back and gather up the broken pieces of their roots from the past, then sometimes a father is not the one who holds them back. He's the one who stands in the doorway, hands open, heart open, so that when they come back, carrying however many new truths, names, and fresh hurts with them, they still know where home is.